My fault. One sec. I got to find you. My fault. There we go.
All right. I think I should be unmuted now. Is that right?
Yes.
Awesome. And I think I might need to be made co-host to be able to share my screen. Yeah. Wait on that. So as Jenny does that, and we sort of be able to get my slides up here. I just want to really thank you guys for inviting me to be with. I think I have Bob to thank for volunteering me, kind of giving my name in as a speaker and help assistance today. So thank you. I've always been really impressed with RSDSA since I became aware of them several years ago. I've been fortunate to be able to speak at live conferences in the before times when we could do those things live, both in Nashville and Denver, and just the people are warm, the resources they provide, and everything is just from the heart and really in the spirit of helping both patients and caregivers. So I can't say enough good things about it. So I'm happy to be here to support this today for sure. And Jenny, I know there's some folks in the waiting room as well. So I'm really, like I said, I'm really glad to have this opportunity. So let me see if I can share my screen. And Jenny, I didn't hear the little, it is now recording message. So I'm not sure if it is.
It is now recording.
Awesome. Okay. Cool. All right, so maybe some nods if you can make sure you can see my slides up on full screen and also see the video. So we're doing good with that. That's shared successfully. That's great. And you can hear my audio. Okay, great. All right, very cool. All right, so I'm gonna navigate through these here, and we're actually gonna start with a poll. All right, I wanna just get a little interaction here. And let's see. So what we're gonna do, you're gonna see a poll pop up on your screen. Now in the video, it won't show. So I'm just gonna describe this a little bit for you. I'm gonna launch this poll. Now I saw from registrations, we've got people here from all the way from Florida to Hawaii, and that's awesome. But I'm curious to know about your relationship with a person with CRPS. So all you have to do is tap on your answer. You're gonna see what is your relationship to the individual. For example, I am blank of a loved one living with CRPS. And we'll just get some answers coming in here. Awesome. Oh, nice wide range of people who are supporting their loved one. Awesome. That's great. Okay, I'm gonna give a couple other seconds here. I think most people have responded now. Great. All right, so we're gonna end this and I'm gonna share the results. So it looks like what we have here, oh, I'm curious about other, if it's a friend perhaps. Oh no, friends is up there, huh? Maybe I didn't put spouse on there, did I? A spouse or a significant other or a partner. So that's probably other is somebody who is in a relationship with somebody with CRPS. We have some parents, we have some siblings, we have some children and some friends. So again, it's really special that you are here today to really support this. So hopefully we're able to answer your questions with that. All right. So I just want to be able to go over the scope and the intent of this presentation. We get a lot of questions in about, how do we treat CRPS? What are the treatments? How do I find providers? And those are excellent questions. And of course you want to be able to find resources. That's going to be a little outside the scope of tonight's presentation. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I'm going to be addressing some of the mental health factors that go along with caregiving in particular. And a lot of the tips and recommendations will be helpful for both the person living with CRPS and also hopefully you, all right? So I will allude to some resources at the very end just to kind of share with you, how would I find out about specific treatments or the state of the science? There are ways to do that. I'll share that with you later, but that's not going to be really within the main scope of my presentation tonight, or really even the question and answers. So I just sort of wanted to share that up front. We'll get to what I call the meat and potatoes of my presentation tonight, which will be the slides. Again, sort of going over, I kind of thought of this as just a broad overview of challenges and suggestions for people who are in caregiving roles. And I did a little graphic. So I'm gonna alert us to when there are buzzwords, right? There are always buzzwords in clinical psychology research, in the media, when you kind of read about some of these issues, and just things that are right now really the current state of the science. So whenever you see the little B for buzzwords, that means that's really something that would be a take-home point that I definitely want you to try to carry with you, and maybe even something that you would want to look up on your own later. Google that buzzword and find out more about it. All right, and then I wanted to get this little, oh yeah, I'm trying to find my little red spotlight thing here. Oh, I found it. Okay. Can you see the little red dot? I was so excited to learn about this on Zoom. That's great. And like I mentioned, we'll go over recommendations and resources. And then at the end, we'll finish up with a question and answer session. I have tried to answer as many of the questions that you submitted with your registration during my presentation. So I did take those to heart when I was designing my topics. But again, at the end, if anything pops up as you're listening and you're thinking through how this applies to you, please feel free to save that. You'll be able toward the end to pop those questions in the chat room or raise your hand and we can call on you and you can share your question in that way. All right. Okay. So, and if anything pops up, Jenny or Sharon, like that I can't see in the chat, or there's any technical issues, like all of a sudden you can't hear me, please just signal wildly and I will address that for sure. So I want to start by acknowledging the basics of persistent pain in general, okay? We can think of the impact of persistent pain with this metaphorical image of an iceberg, right? We might see certain signs on the surface, right? For some pain conditions, the outward signs of pain might be invisible. For, pain doesn't really have a weight or a height or a length that you can measure easily. Even diagnostic testing isn't without its issues, right? If something shows up on a diagnostic scan or test, it doesn't prove intensity of pain or predict outcomes. And we know on the reverse side that if something isn't showing up on a scan or test, it doesn't mean the patient is faking it or it's all in their head. It's very real to them. So we know that measurement can be really difficult. Now with CRPS, right in the diagnostic criteria are built in signs and symptoms. So some of which might be very visible, like swelling or color changes or hair growth changes or nail changes, and temperature differences, right, between limbs. So there are some visible signs of this that come and go. Sometimes you might see them, sometimes you don't, but sometimes there's parts of this that are visible. We also may see how an individual might start to neglect use of the limb that's affected by the pain. We might see how their mood and their affect, their facial expressions change. We may see them start to isolate and retreat. We may see them start to look fatigued due to insomnia and problems sleeping because of pain. So there are some things we can see when we look, but there's still so much more under the surface. So we know there are changes to the nervous system in the brain. When the nervous system gets continuous input and signals of pain and pain and pain, it changes things. It changes the way the brain reacts and processes information. We can't see that, but it's there. We know that there are changes then to the immune system and other body mechanisms because, all of that intertwines, right? Cardiovascular, GI, immune, like I mentioned, it all is connected. So they all kind of change over time. And we know that underneath there can be mood changes, even some you might not see, but a person might be feeling anxiety about the future with pain, maybe some guilt, hopelessness sometimes about what's going to happen, helplessness, feeling like I can't fix this. I'm doing everything I can and just feel helpless to cope with my pain. We might notice some anger and frustration underlying there, low motivation, fear of pain flares or re-injury, right? Like maybe our patient that we love is starting to cope with the baseline symptoms, but what if we hit that area again, or there's a surgery that's needed? What happens? Flares can be really scary. We could be grieving the loss of function and quality of life and changes to identity and self-esteem. And so much of that is just roiling under the surface. And I haven't even mentioned the effects on the caregivers yet, right? So these are all these things under the surface just with a patient with chronic persistent pain and CRPS in particular. So what often also gets ignored is that pain doesn't exist in a vacuum. It can affect the whole family, like little layers that just kind of come out from the center. So again, our focus today is going to be on these often overlooked effects on caregivers or loved ones that know somebody who's living with a painful condition like CRPS. So this is a little bit of a busy slide. If you're up on a laptop or computer, you might be able to see it well. On a phone, probably not. But I'm going to go through it a little bit. So what we know is that the initial experience of pain from the initial injury, let's say, causes some pretty vicious cycles, both physical and psychological. So where we have here is the cycle that the patient would experience. So oftentimes we have pain. The person might draw back on their activity a bit because we know that activity can increase pain in certain ways. As a person stops moving and doesn't use the affected limb, muscles can get deconditioned, right? That's just more of a weakening. Then start to have even more pain with less activity because now the muscles aren't used to moving. When we start to move again, it hurts more. More activity avoidance, more deconditioning, and it leads to this vicious cycle of pain and avoidance. On this other side, we have the mood cycle. So pain, like I mentioned earlier, can be accompanied by all of these different mood states, especially early on, leading to more depression. When a person is low or anxious, that actually heightens the perception of pain. We feel more pain intensity. We're suffering more. It sort of turns the volume knob up more, have more pain, and the cycle starts again. So those are two very common cycles we see when a person has an injury and pain. Now, what I wrote over here in the blue is sort of the initial attempts at, I gotta move my chat box here, the initial attempts of a caregiver to get involved. So when somebody notices their loved one starting to pull back on activities because they're hurting, you may, as a caregiver, start to pay more attention, help with daily tasks like, oh, can I fold this for you, get this dish for you, prepare you a meal. That's a natural caregiving response, right? But what can happen, what I put in the red, as this cycle continues and a person really should be starting to enter the phase where they start testing their limits and trying to get back to a regular quality of life, which it will be different, but some sort of function and quality of life. The caregiver is now also caught in the vicious cycle of maybe over-investing and starting to do it all, right? I'll drive you everywhere. I'll prepare all of your meals. I'll help you dress, really taking over much of the functions, even of self-care and daily living. So it's understandable to want to offer the help, but it can then get caught up in that same cycle. And same thing on the mood side. So as you notice your loved one start to have mood changes as a result of their pain, You may start to establish new roles like, okay, I'm your wife or I'm your child, but I'm also going to help you. I'm going to nurse you through this. Kind of starting a different way of eh, interacting, offering empathy, right? Oh, I feel what I'm trying to feel what you're feeling. I have so much, I also feel this pain in a way, and I feel this depression. Again, that's very normal and natural in a caregiving role. But what can happen, again, as you get caught up in the vicious cycle, is you may start to over attend to the person's negative expressions and pain behaviors and sort of say, oh, okay, I see them looking sad. I have to jump in and do something. I see them wincing. I have to fix this for them. Now we know when we make those attempts to fix it, we often get stuck. There isn't a great fix or simple cure. If there was, we wouldn't be here. We would all be doing that thing, right? So there isn't. That's what makes this so difficult. So as a caregiver, you may have entered that cycle of let me try, let me help, let me fix this, and then feeling so helpless to do so. Sometimes that helplessness and frustration can lead you to disengage and say, I've got to push away. I'm starting to resent this. I'm starting to get really frustrated. So we see over attentiveness, we see disengagement. Again, these are cycles that happen. So if you have found yourself in either of these cycles, then please, I mean, don't, this is not a, this is not right or this is bad. It's very normal, but it can get unhealthy. So we just want to talk about some strategies to pull away from that and make sure that we're in the healthy zone of caring for our loved one. So one of the first things I like to start with, and just how can you help, is learning about pain, learning about CRPS. And the fact that you're here today shows that you are invested in that. You want to understand the person you care about. That's amazing. And many of us who don't experience pain on this level, persistent pain, we just don't get it. Maybe we're used to, oh, we bumped our arm or we broke our arm, it healed, we had a surgery, it was done, it's gone. I bounced back, I recovered. Not all pain follows that path. And we have to allow room for that. There's nothing wrong inherent in the person that has chronic pain. They didn't make it stay chronic, but we just have to realize that it's different than maybe the pains we're used to. So persistent pain, and they sort of have changed now from chronic pain to persistent pain. It's just the language change. But persistent pain involves changes to multiple systems of the body. It's different than just acute pain from a short-term injury that heals and then we're done. It's a whole different beast. It involves changes to the brain and all of those different those pathways that I talked about earlier. We also know with persistent pain that chemicals like hormones and neurotransmitters can amplify the message in the nervous system. So if there's been an injury, there's been some nerve injury, that is sending a normal alarm to the brain, something has happened here. Over time, the initial threat fades often. There's not always permanent damage. It kind of fades, that initial threat. But stress hormones like cortisol, brain chemicals, which are neurotransmitters like norepinephrine and serotonin, they get all wonky and they make the nervous system really look for any sort of signal in the arm or the leg or in the periphery of the body. So it heightens and amplifies all of those messages. We also know that persistent pain, by its very definition, impacts emotional suffering. Okay, so when you think about the standard definition of persistent pain is a sensory and emotional experience. Both are involved. And the way that usually happens is because there's shared brain regions. I'm going to show you those in a second, but different brain regions are activated that light up in both pain and depression or anxiety. So it's understandable that there would be mood changes with pain. And again, changes in shared neurotransmitters. So you may have heard about something like serotonin or norepinephrine in different antidepressants. That's what we're trying to regulate when we take different antidepressants. But those are also involved in pain signaling. So again, it just makes sense that pain and mood issues would go hand in hand. This is another busy slide, but I liked it, and just so I want to kind of point you to what I'm talking about. Because a lot of people just say, what is this? What is pain? What is CRPS? So we're really talking to sort of the effects on the nervous system, the peripheral nervous system. Like I mentioned, it affects whole body systems. You could feel pain in other areas. Pain in CRPS can spread to opposite limbs from upper to lower body and vice versa. It can affect, it can change, it can kind of like travel and change to different places. So it's, the nervous system is a weird, wild thing. I mentioned the brain regions that sort of overlap in both pain and mood. So there's many areas in the frontal cortex that are activated with pain, and it affects mood as well. And then we get the question a lot, why me? Why in me did this pain continue and not just resolve in 3 months, right? After the initial healing, why? And again, it comes down to many factors. So it could be the extent of damage. It could be the stress the person was going through at the time. They know that persistence of pain is even affected by things that happened in childhood. Okay, if there was abuse or trauma, that doesn't cause pain, but it could make pain last longer than is expected. We know that genetics, even the genetics of your parents, can affect whether a person goes on to develop persistent pain. Medication use, changes in the spine. There's so many factors that could cause pain to continue past the point of normal healing. Okay. So when we say why or what is the cause, I wish it was a simple answer. It's just not. It's just there are many issues, there are many causes that affect how that initial nerve damage persists. So no blame. It just is what it is. It's really almost like like you've been dealt a hand of cards. This is how we can't ask the dealer why you gave me these cards, or hey, can you give me a whole different set of cards? We can't do that. We really have to kind of play those cards that were dealt. Okay, so some basics here to remember again about persistent pain. These are just, again, the kind of background of this, that pain medicines are only one tool in a large toolbox. So would not encourage going purely down a medication path. Each tool in the toolbox gets you a little bit of ways down the field. I would say there's no Hail Mary pass. I'm a big football fan. There's no Hail Mary pass in pain management. No one thing gets you all the way there. So it really is additive in being able to use medicines properly, and relaxation and rest and social support and supplements and proper diet and good sleep. All of those things gradually can get you to a manageable quality of life. So when we talk about the first buzzword here, self-management is really key. This is really this movement within healthcare to take the ownership of the disease or painful condition and find our own tools to manage it. It's less about relying on a doctor, less about relying on a provider to do it for us, and taking that ownership and management. The good news here is that all those changes that I mentioned to the brain and the nervous system, they can be retrained to normalize. Maybe not all the way back to where we were, but there are some amazing training systems now, apps that teach us how to kind of recognize right versus left and retrain and reorganize the connections in the brain. That's called neuroplasticity. So that's another one to Google. If you wanted to Google CRPS and neuroplasticity, you will come upon some really interesting information and tools to retrain the brain to help us with our function in the limb. And I would say this takes a lot of time and effort and persistence. It is not an overnight quick fix. It really takes quite a bit of effort, but it can be done. So there is hope to restore some quality of life there. Okay, one little thing that I like to kind of always include is whenever we can do something naturally, that's just best for the body, right? That's just sort of the healthiest, no side effects to doing something naturally and boosting our own chemicals. So when we think about the drug cabinet in the brain, we have a whole host of chemicals that can help us feel better. And so these are things like dopamine, which is our reward chemical, serotonin, which is kind of our happiness chemical, endorphins, which sort of give us that rush of pleasure, and oxytocin, which is it's a love chemical. It kind of makes us feel warm and accepted and loved. And so there are so many activities we can engage in to access this drug cabinet. Now, I mentioned this for use with patients, but again, we can all do this as caregivers, as general humans. Let's make sure we're letting the brain do what it's supposed to do. So activities like meditation, that really can help with boosting serotonin, our happiness chemical. Hugs and hanging out with pets and cuddling babies and all that kind of stuff, that kind of hug, that skin touch, and we can't do that as much with COVID now, but sort of that social interaction boosts that oxytocin, and it really makes us feel warm and accepted. Engaging in creative endeavors, exercise boosts endorphins, getting out in sunshine or getting one with nature, getting new memories. So, we tend with chronic pain, we tend to retreat, kind of peel away. The fun goes first, and then the kind of the shoulds, and then we're sort of left sometimes without much new opportunity. But when we pursue something new, the brain wakes up and it's like, oh, I'm learning this new language, or I'm seeing a new sight, and it just lights up like a Christmas tree, and it can help to combat the effects of pain in the brain. Laughter, it boosts the dopamine. It's a rewarding thing. It's a social chemical. So laughter is the one of the best medicines for sure. And again, this applies both for the patient and the caregiver. All right, I'm going to skip this slide. This was a really cool graphic that I saw. This mostly just talks about all of the different brain areas that essentially are affected by meditation and gratitude alone. So if you were to implement something like a daily gratitude practice where you write down 3 things that you feel blessed by, just at the end of the day, jot 3 things down or talk to your loved one about it, that affects so many of these areas of the brain that can help combat pain. These also, again, meditation. So doing a little guided relaxation, just sitting there, being aware of your breath. Doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be complicated, but just being aware. And I know we've got some folks on who do a daily, like a meditation practice, and have found it helpful. And maybe you'll share your experience with that a little bit, Jenny, later. But yeah, so very helpful. Lots of different effects of these lovely practices to include in. And free. You don't even have to spend money to do those. That's pretty cool. So I'm trying to keep my eye on the time, but I want to talk first, before I talk about the challenges and really kind of have that empathic discussion about the challenges of caregiving, I do want to talk about the beauty of it. We sort of can't help it, many of us. And I don't want to gender stereotype. I know there are some male caregivers on here as well. We know it's a little bit of a different relationship sometimes, depending on the gender of the person with pain. That's just what the research shows. But there's excellent caregivers all around for sure. So I'm not doing full men are from Mars, women are from Venus. But what we know is, just as humans, our survival instincts are triggered when somebody we care about is in danger. Our instinct is to help, for survival of our species, for survival of our pack. That's just what we do. So we sort of can't help it. So that's kind of neat. We're indulging in our basic animal instincts when we're a caregiver. So give yourself a round of applause, because evolution has brought you to evolve to the best specimen you can be of a human. There's also an opportunity here to develop resilience. Positive psychology is really my jam. I like talking more about resilience and empathy and all that kind of stuff, more so than just negative mood states. So thinking about resilience as the bounce back effect. You don't get to develop it unless you're put down. You can't bounce back if you never experience hardship, right? So the fact that you may have been going through something tough, sure, it's tough, but it gives you the opportunity to rise. And so there's a real beauty in that part of it as well. Also being able to tap into your natural empathy, right? So empathy is the state of being able to identify, there's a cognitive empathy, identifying with what the other person might be experiencing, recognizing it. And then emotional or affective empathy is the ability to sort of feel what the other person's feeling. And again, that's driven by the brain. There are things called mirror neurons in the brain that light up when we see someone else do something. You know how yawning is contagious? If I were to do a big yawn right now, which maybe I will because now I said it out loud, you also might yawn, right? Because your mirror neurons kind of are activated suddenly, involuntarily. So when we see someone hurting and wincing and sad, our brains kind of can feel the same way. It's contagious. It's not always natural to everyone to do that. Some of us really struggle with having that empathy, and that's fine. We're just all built differently, okay? So it might be that it's tougher to be a natural caregiver, and that's okay. There's ways to still show your care, even if you kind of have to like put Post-it notes on your door to remind yourself to hug your spouse or something. That's okay. We also can get into the empathy trap. And that's where we're not only just kind of experiencing that, we are feeling overwhelmed by our emotions for others. You know, I've had spouses come in and they call it our pain or our nausea. And it's like, no, that's too enmeshed, right? There still has to be a little bit of a distance there. And then the silver lining is a beauty as well, where you're able to say maybe, what have you learned from your experience as a caregiver or your hardship that you might not have known otherwise? Maybe you've learned you got more patience than you ever expected. Or maybe you learned you're really good at making chicken soup. Or maybe you learned you know who your friends are now, right? Because they've stuck with you. So sometimes these tough experiences give us the opportunity to learn, and we don't want to overlook those either. All right, I gotta speed this up. I'm talking too much today. Okay, sorry about that. So then we have to honor also the challenges of caregiving. And so I just did pictures just to break it up. But this picture is supposed to represent burnout. There's a very real possibility of getting so drained where your resources are not enough to meet the demands of what you have to do. And that's this feeling of burnout. It's just this low energy. I've reached down into my well and I just don't have any more there. Okay. So that's a very real peril for caregivers. This is a person wearing many hats to represent dual roles or multiple roles, right? Are you a wife, but also a caregiver? Those things are hard to separate. There are times when you just want to be a wife, right? Or you just want to be a kid. You just want to be the child of somebody. You don't want to also have to, do the caregiving role. It's very hard to juggle two roles. They often get it blended. And we kind of miss the old role of just being able to be husband or just being able to be mother and not also have those additional expectations. We know here, this little picture just talks about how maybe communication patterns will change. And if I've got time, I'll go over that as well. Time management is also a burden. That's this little clock. When you're a caregiver, it feels like there's 1,000 things to do and we just can't make more hours in the day. So being able to structure your time and still have a balance in your own life can be very difficult as well. I put the little me blocks here to just remind you that it is always important to take care of yourself and practice self-care. You know, you're never going to get away from a psychology talk without hearing the words self-care. It's just important. But a lot of us wrestle with the concept of selfishness. Self-care feels selfish. It's just about me. I will tell you, it's not. It's probably the least selfish thing you can do, because you need to be able to recharge your batteries to be helpful for others. So taking a little time for you is, again, it's probably the least selfish thing. I put here this picture, just making sure that you as caregivers recognize it and address your own mood changes. You will also go through fear for your loved one, fear of financial stability, grief over the loss of the relationship that you had, maybe the loss of time, the loss of spontaneity, the loss of being able to plan ahead, the worry, depression. There's so much involved. So you might be so involved thinking through your loved one's mood issues that you kind of neglect your own, but don't. Be aware of what you're feeling. It's very valid. And then, of course, there are many more burdens as well. People might be afraid to ask for help, right? To delegate, isolation, right? Friends sort of, they're there in the beginning when we're going through a hardship, but oftentimes they fall away. Also, let's add COVID to the mix, and that can be really tough, kind of feel isolating. So this kind of brings me to my second point. You guys, I might go 5 minutes over or so on the talk, if that's okay, because hopefully this is helpful. All right, want to just do a real quick poll here. This is, have the restrictions that have been imposed by COVID-19 increased your stress level beyond typical caregiving stress loads, right? So you already got your own thing. Let's add a pandemic to the mix. Yeah, this is kind of what I expected. And thank you guys, you're responding so quickly. I'm glad you're so engaged and sharing your information with us. Awesome. In the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and end the polling and share this because y'all responded so quickly. Surprise, surprise. A large majority of us have been affected by this, right? So this can be so many things going on. Now, I'm glad that a couple haven't, right? Maybe there's already been a distance, or you found workarounds with it, and that's fantastic. But some of the issues with COVID is this anxiety in the face of uncertainty, right? So it's like, what's going to happen tomorrow? We have no idea. When are you going to be available for the vaccine, or what's going to happen in the future with healthcare or persistent symptoms? So that's scary for everybody right now. But when somebody's living with pain in it, and you as a caregiver, you're already dealing with this. You have an uncertain future, right? We don't know the trajectory of the symptoms or your relationship. So there's already this ongoing anxiety in the face of uncertainty. It's just compounded right now this year. Again, increased isolation, access to healthcare, right? So I work with many, probably 50% of my clients here in Canada have CRPS. And many were kind of going in and maybe getting periodic ketamine infusions or stellate ganglion blocks. They were going to refill medicines. And now hospitals had shut down and they weren't able to get these helpful infusions or get access to physical therapy. So all of a sudden, some of the treatments that benefit from consistency vanished. And that can be really, really difficult. So what do we do in the face of that? All we can do is sort of go back to the basics, control the controllables. There's a buzzword. I say this a lot. When in doubt, when you feel like the mountain's too big to climb, you just take a step, right? So you bring it back to the now and say, what can I change in this very moment? What can I control? You know what? I can take a breather. I can watch a funny show. I'm going to go get a glass of water. I can prepare a healthy meal tonight. What can I control about right now? And that restores a little bit of empowerment. You can control your own behaviors and emotions and thoughts and reactions. You can't control anybody else's, but you can control your own. You can control your health choices, again, your personal wellness plan, and you can control the use of your time. How much time you're going to devote to family or leisure or work. So always sort of come back to the moment to control those controllables. All right. I am going to skip this a little bit because I could probably do a whole separate talk just on acceptance, pain acceptance, acceptance and mindfulness. So I'm going to say these things and drop a bug in the ear of the planners that if we do want to do more of these, here are some topics that might be fun to explore if the audience is interested in these things. But I think with acceptance, it's the main points are, when we talk about it, it's not about giving up or giving in. It's not about defeat. It's really about softening around this. I love this quote from Carl Jung: what you resist persists. The more we fight it, the more we complain about it, it's still there. The problem is still there. The pain is still there. Our changed relationships are still there. But if we accept them, that's when you see change. And I think one other little part of acceptance for caregivers is accept that this is not yours to fix. This is not your issue to take on your shoulders. You are there to help. You are there for support. This is not yours to fix. I can't say that enough. I know it's something we all take on as caregivers for sure. Relationships change as well in caregiving. And these are just sort of the main parts of a healthy relationship. All the little ingredients is mutual respect, having clear boundaries. Again, in a psych talk, you're always going to hear the buzzword of boundaries. This is my little picture of just setting clear boundaries. Creating time for each other, but making sure you're also taking time for your own hobbies, your own friends. You're allowed to do that. So making sure you balance that time. Having privacy. There are some things your loved one might not want to share with you. That's okay too, right? And being honest about your feelings and really owning those. And we can, again, I would love to do another talk sometime if you all are interested in communication and relationships. These are tips just about using I statements. Again, another buzzword. So when you do need to have a conversation with your loved one and confronting something that's happening with you, always, I was just going to say, don't use always or nevers, but I just started with that. So really try to focus on using I statements, right? So I feel this way because of this behavior that you're doing. And what I need is this compromise, rather than you're making me do this. You're always complaining. You don't let me do anything. You don't ever want to always think of you as like you're pointing at somebody's face. That's not going to feel good. It's going to put them on the defensive. So own your emotions and start with I. Give you 1,000 more tips on that. So please, again, if you want that, we could do that at another time. Also, be your own therapist. Watch out for these patterns of thought. So in caregivers, again, we hear a lot of always and nevers. I never get to do this. You're never helping with this. You're always doing this. We do a lot of mind reading in relationships. So we think we know what our loved one is thinking or feeling, right? Even though they might not be saying it. We might do what I call shoulding on yourself, is saying, oh, well, they should know what I need. Or I shouldn't be, I do this with diet all the time. I shouldn't be eating this candy bar. Right? We beat ourselves up so much with these rigid rules. And then I can't standarditis is just if somebody's doing something you don't like, then we feel like it's just intolerable and we don't even have space for that. And I just can't stand it. Also with communication, and this is something that we could address in the Q&A instead of in the slide right now. Maybe the audience members haven't dealt with this, but it does come up often. I'm not going to do the poll in the interest of time, but this does come up where a loved one might not threaten suicide directly, but might say, I can't live like this anymore. Or if this continues like this, I can't cope. Or I just feel hopeless, right? It would be better if I didn't wake up. I don't want to be a burden to you. So you want to listen for some of those comments. And if you're suspicious, if you're worried about their mood change, address the elephant in the room. Just bring it up. I noticed that you're seeming really down lately. You mentioned you feel like you've lost the will to live. Do you have thoughts about hurting yourself? That can feel awkward to say, but let me tell you, if you bring it up, you are not putting thoughts in your loved one's head. This is something they've thought about already. And if they haven't, then they haven't, and that's fine. But you're not going to be introducing that thought to them. So I would definitely encourage you, if you're noticing major changes, then listen deeply and bring it up. If it's imminent, you want to get medical help, go to the ER. And then I'll share these resources, but there's a wonderful National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and then you can help them access counseling as well. Self-care, I already kind of alluded to that, massive buzzword. I think it is helpful if you feel guilty about taking time for yourself, you do sort of ask yourself, what are your motives then for caring for the person? If you're acting out of pity because you see the loved one as a victim that you have to rescue, then yes, you might act in a way that's like, well, I can't take any time for myself. But if you're acting out of empathy, then you know you're going to be the best caregiver you can be if you nourish yourself as well. So these are just some tips to do that. Delegate, acknowledge your strengths, take time to give yourself some pats on the back and some attaboys, talk to people, nourish your body, feed your soul, right? Mindfulness and gratitude I mentioned earlier. And I just like this picture as a sample of, what do you mean when you're saying be mindful, Yan? Are you having your mind full of all the stuff you have to do and all the worries? Or are you like this doggy who is just seeing what's in front of you and being mindful of the moment and what's happening right there? So there's lots of different practices you can do with this. So in summary, I usually try to avoid do's and don'ts because everyone's situation is different, right? So I don't want to be prescriptive, but I am using this as just a convention, as a summary. So these are offered as recommendations, not commandments that you must follow. Don't try to be super caregiver. You don't have to be super caregiver. There was a patient of mine who realized this, and he was a client with pain. He was trying to raise 2 boys as a single dad. And he goes, I finally realized I don't have to be super dad, because you know what? Clark Kent was a pretty decent guy. And I went, that is awesome. So just be you, and it's going to be enough. All right. Do allow yourself to grieve the loss of your old routine. Things have changed, and they will have probably changed permanently in some ways. That's okay. Life always is changing. We're evolving. Our priorities change. Things happen. Allow yourself to grieve that, because it is, anytime there's a change or a loss, we do feel grief. That's okay. It's okay to share your struggles, even with your loved one, because you might actually give them the opportunity to reciprocate empathy and care, right? If you say, yeah, this is tough on everyone, I really feel for you, it's, this is rough, maybe they can reach out and give you some empathy and some care as well. And that feels good to have that opportunity. Do address the elephant in the room. If there's something that's really bugging you about your loved one, or if you're concerned about them, don't sweep it under the rug, because it will rear its head later. So don't be afraid to confront the issue. You're not confronting the person, you're confronting the issue. And if you use the I statements, that does help you get a little bit of a way towards success. Watch out for over attending to pain behaviors. You don't have to be a pillow fluffer. You don't have to necessarily rush in and offer help unsolicited. Let them see what they can do on their own. One question came up in the registration, which was, should I ask, how are you? Or should I not ask about their pain and how they're feeling? And the answer, the fact that you're asking that probably tells me you already know the answer. You just need permission, that you don't have to ask, how are you? I really actually don't recommend it. How's your pain? What's your pain today? Are you having a bad pain day? That's just putting that thought to the forefront of their mind. So instead of saying, what would you like to do today? What's on your agenda today to learn? Or, what would you like to share with me today? There's different ways to sort of interact with your loved one without focusing on the pain. If you need to have a sit-down meeting to reset dynamics, I recommend that in a family. Do a Zoom meeting if you're distant, or sit down at the table and just say, hey, we recognize that your default is pain, that you are hurting and it has changed your life. We know that, and please trust that we know that. Therefore, you don't actually have to say it all the time. You don't have to mention it over and over, because we're not going to forget. We trust you and we believe you. Know that. That being said, how can we help you? How can you help us help you? So it's okay to kind of reset a family dynamic in here, and just say, here's where we're at, but let's come at it from a level of trust and understanding and belief in the pain. Try a team approach. So that's sort of just saying, okay, instead of saying, well, you really were supposed to fold that laundry and you didn't do it, say, hey, let's fold the laundry together today, or let's do this thing together. It's a we thing. It's an approach like that. Take care of yourself. Practice self-compassion. One trick to this that I like, if you're struggling and you're sort of tough on yourself, ask yourself what you would tell a loved one or a friend who was going through the same situation, right? What advice would you give them? And more often than not, the advice we would give somebody else is way more compassionate and reasonable and rational than what we do ourselves. We're way tougher on our own selves. So ask yourself the advice you'd give another person, and then take that advice, because it's more compassionate. And darn it, go have some fun. Leisure is often the first thing to go. It's vital to a balanced life and healthy mood. So you are allowed, you have my permission to have some fun in your life. You're allowed it. Okay, I'm going to whip through resources, but we can make these available. We can make this, well, the video will be available to you. So you'll be able to flip through this again and be able to kind of type in then, and, you know, Google or Amazon, any books or resources. So I'm going to go through quickly so we can get to the Q&A. But these are just a couple of recommended books about learning about the pain basics, how it's difficult for patients living with it, and a little self-compassion for the caregiver. There are a whole bunch of wonderful online resources. So a little 5-minute video on this Tame the Beast website. It's very, very good. A couple meditations that I recommend. This loving kindness is for kind of self-compassion and empathy. And the mountain meditation is just empowerment, feeling strong in the face of chaos. So you are the mountain as the seasons change around you. And it's a really lovely one. And so I put a little link there that you'll be able to kind of type in when you relook at the video. That's some guided downloads. And you could just really look at YouTube for these. There are also some excellent apps like Calm or Headspace. And Jenny, don't worry, I only have 1 more minute. I'm not going to go too over time. The other frequently asked questions we get are about treatment options for CRPS itself, and how do I find providers in my area. So the first thing is about treatment options. Like I mentioned, that's really beyond the scope of today. But I am going to point you to the RSDSA website. Okay, so rsds.org, I believe. I think I got that right. Yes, rsds.org. And y'all, I am impressed with the amount of information on here. So they have, if you go to the treatment section in the drop-down boxes, you're going to see lists. You're going to see links to more information that's vetted, right? It's not just like people, talking about it. It's like real stuff. There are some amazing videos from the live sessions that they've done. And I know one of my favorites is from Dr. Chopra. He spoke at Denver. I think he spoke in Nashville too. And he does such a thorough review of our current, like every single treatment you could think of under the sun. And then he color codes it like, this one doesn't have a lot of evidence. Yeah, steer clear maybe. This one's a green. This is a go. You should really think about this because there's a lot of good evidence. So I would look up his video on the YouTube channel for RSDSA. And again, it's Dr. Chopra. He would be, this is my personal opinion. I thought he did a very good job on that. So that would be something good. The other question is, how do I find reputable providers in my location? So we'll say, okay, I live in so-and-so. Who are the people who treat CRPS in my area? Again, out of the scope of what I know, and y'all live in different places. So I can't tell you all definitively. But again, if you go to the website, you will find a way. There is a limited treatment referral list. We can't, from the organization point of view, we're not, I'm not sponsoring, or we can't really give full opinions on people, right? So that's not what we do. But we could say, well, here are some people we know who treat it, right? We don't know how good they are. We can't say that. There's also other links to, if you go to the pain medicine organization or pain management organization, they might operate some lists of people. So I would say, start there. And you could also go to your state medical board and call them and just say, hey, do you know who specializes in CRPS, or who's the neurologist in town? And just kind of see through there. For psychology referrals, there's just not enough to go around, honey, I'll tell you that. And so it can be tough, but you could look up on psychologytoday.com, I think. And what you do is you type in your zip code, and you type in pain, and you can see who's there and what insurance plans they take. So you can see if they're going to be covered under your insurance. So there's PhD providers, there's counselors, social workers. If they're well versed in helping someone with health issues, they'll have that on their profile. Then that would be somebody you could reach out to. So, woo, I did it. All right, over time. I'm so sorry, y'all, but we will make the time for the Q&A for sure. So, all right, the presentation portion has ended now. I think we're going to be turning off the recording, and that, again, that will be made available to you, and